irish.ie and Irish News Radio. Today is Monday, and what an awful day it is. It's a lashing, disgusting, horrible cold day. But we will be talking about the financial mess that Ireland is in, and particularly the Irish Indigenous population are in. So the first bit of thing that we'll talk about is the public water ownership to be debated. But 6 out of 8 voters to postpone the discussion. 3 were Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and 2 Fianna Fáil, and the rest independent and Sinn Féin. Say they want a referendum on what water, although the water charges have been paid for by indirect taxes and privatisation of our water. This is all about for the EU. They have to bring it up, and the water taxes will be brought back in. No matter about all the protests, they will bring it back in. It'll be like Lisbon again, or Nice, or the fiscal treaty. Anything that the EU want to be brought in, it will be brought in. And our government, the Rent Boy Leo and the rest of the puppets will be happy enough no matter what the Irish think. So it doesn't really matter what the Irish think. The government have supported water taxes from the word go. For the EU, they're trying to impose the minimum water charges. If we have a referendum, they will impose the EU charges. They're going to impose the EU charges anyway. So there's nothing we can do about that. They are going to bring that in. Ireland is not neutral, so anybody thinks that Ireland is neutral. We haven't been neutral since Leo, the rent boy for the EU, signed up to PESCO, and our children will be sent to some war in some foreign country, or possibly here for anybody who's speaking out against the EU, UN, or any of the other things. The army will be sent in to shut these people up who have an opinion or thought or brain in their head. They will be told they're not allowed a brain or a thought in their own head. Irish News Radio, and it's an awful day, but we'll be talking about the financial mess the country's in because of the EU and Leo and the rest of the EU puppets. Talk about the EU are trying to bring in the privatisation of our water again, and it will be brought in because we've nothing but Rent Boy and EU puppets, so it will be brought in, and it will impose the EU charges on us no matter what the Irish people think. The Irish government have been for the taxation of our water from the word go, and they will bring it in. No matter what they say, they will bring it in. Those meters are out there for a reason. It'll be like the Lisbon, the Nice. They don't really care what the Irish people think. The Indigenous Irish people, that is, they couldn't care less. They will bring it in, and they will do it because the EU want it, and they want a uniform because they're running this Nazi regime where the EU now has taken ownership of Europe without a bullet. So this will be part of the water, the money, everything else is controlled by Brussels, and what the Irish people think really doesn't matter to them. And Ireland is not a neutral country. Anyone who thinks it is really needs to read up, because we are part of PESCO. Leo signed us in, and no, we weren't asked, but we are signed in, and yes, our children will be sent off to war, but more likely they'll be sent into what so-called is now fascism, which is really anybody with a brain in their head who will want to discuss the EU or the UN Migrant Pact or anything that poses a threat to our civilization or our country. Anybody like that, or any country that wants to have a thoughts of their own that is not EU puppet sort of talk, then yeah, the army will be sent in to shut those bad people off, or those bad thoughts, because they're dangerous to have thoughts of your own that is not the EU. And the Rent Boy EU goes on. Yeah, the Rent Boy for the EU says EU is not a prison. Then why can't the UK leave? Nobody is forced to stay, but they make it impossible to leave. A very sad part. Ireland, for the Indigenous Irish, there's 800,000 Irish living now below poverty line, says St. Vincent De Paul. And yet you have people like Bono screaming out for Africans and for Americans to open the border to take more economic migrants, where the Irish, nobody gives a crap about them. You don't hear anybody screaming out to help the Irish. 800,000 Irish, Indigenous Irish, living below the poverty line, and nobody's caring. And 100,000 of them are working in low paid jobs. The most vulnerable people in Ireland are the Indigenous Irish. A record number of homeless, because Michael D. Higgins signed in the eviction bill, but you voted him back in again, where he put the Irish on the streets. And most of those evicted homes are being given to non-Irish. It's an absolutely disgrace. 50% of the homeless are lone parents from separation, because financial problems had led a lot of them through the separation. And put them on the street. 61% of families are struggling with educational costs. They can't afford for their children to stay in school or stay in education. It's really, really bad. Despite the improvements of our economic, the Irish Indigenous have never been as poor and are homeless since the state began. They've never had the record number of homeless since the state began. The state of poverty with older people, people with disabilities, young homeless mothers has never been seen since the state began. It's absolutely shocking and a disgrace, a national disgrace, on how the Irish are treated in Ireland. The Indigenous Irish are treated. If they're disabled, they're old, or they're young mothers, they're sent onto the streets, and there's nobody screaming out. There's nobody caring, like the Africans or the economic bullshit migrants who are young men who could easily get a job, who haven't got young children to look after, who are just men who come in here, are given houses, are given all the welfare, and Irish taxpayers are paying for them, while our older people, people with disabilities, young mothers, have no chance. And the Irish government doesn't care, because they're Indigenous Irish and they're completely racist towards the Irish people for the EU. A woman was banned, not unusual for Fascistbook, for posing a picture of Iranian volleyball before it was an Islamic state in 1970, and after and after as it is today. So in 1970, anybody know anything about Islamic countries before it was an Islamic state? It was probably freer than Ireland at that stage in 1970. You know, you'd seen them with their shorts on and their t-shirts on and no hijabs, and then obviously it was forced Islamic dress code, so they all have their long sleeves and their long kind of legging things and their hijab on, because once it becomes Islamic, women's lives are worth nothing and they're not allowed dress like that, because it's seen as evil. You have moral police controlling that sort of behaviour, and you wouldn't be allowed to do that. Not even behaviour, you don't have freedom as a female. So because this woman, who was a former editor in a newspaper, is questioning this online harms. She wants to know who the online harms for, and unacceptable for who. She wasn't even making a political statement. I think she just genuinely put up the two pictures of Iranian 1970 and as it is today. I don't know whether she was really making it political, but anybody who have half a brain can see that once it becomes an Islamic country, this is the way it goes. And once you start allowing it, as in Ireland now, that they're talking about allowing Islamic dress code into Irish schools and having Christian symbols being taken off or having it optional. But then once you have Islamic codes, as explained before hundreds of times, then you take away their excuse of not wearing the hijab, because they don't get a choice to wear the hijab. It's not like, would you like to wear the hijab? I've explained hundreds of times. Once you take away their excuse, their families will force them into wearing the long skirts, the long shirts, and the hijabs. It's not just the hijabs, it's everything that goes with it. It's wrong, but anyway, so she goes on to wonder who these online harms are and acceptable to who are they monitoring it for. And it's really, it shows that there is a crackdown of the internet free speech and the internet as we know it. But anybody who's been online for a while knows that Fascistbook it's not a new thing for them to be people to be banned for absolutely nothing. It's nothing to do with, even before it was like maybe a crude word or whatever. You can get banned for a picture, you can get banned for your opinion, you can get banned for a few words. It doesn't even have to be insulting. If they find it unacceptable, they're running, and it's very much leftist bullshit propaganda. So if you have a picture of maybe a woman in a hijab and you tell her how beautiful it is and it's so much nicer than Christian, that wouldn't get banned. But if you have the vice versa, that'll get banned. It's only one narrow view, and it's through the EU, the UN, all this narrow, and because the UN is basically Islamic, as explained before, because the human rights is run by Saudi, and the women's rights is with Iran and Saudi. Have a look at those countries. Neither of them have human rights, never mind women's rights. Women aren't even seen as human, as I've explained before. And only recently women have moved up to what was known as like a piece of paper or a pen belonging to a man. So that would have been passed down from your father to your uncle, to your brother, to your son, to your husband. Once that gets passed around like this pen or piece of paper belonging to a man, you had no human rights. You've only moved up recently, about a year or so ago, to just under a goat, and that is what a woman's value is. And they thought this was great, that they were moving on such great distance on women's values, that they're now worth just under a goat, not quite worth a mammal. That is their value. This is why you could, as men, they can have 4 wives. All they have to do is go, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you 3 times, and you're divorced. You have no rights to your home, no financial rights. You're on the streets. And then he just can pick up another wife. He can also have sex slaves. He can have marriage for half an hour, which is really prostitution, but they have a word for it. So it's like a short marriage. So this is, and then he just has to divorce her after he has, sex with her. It's really prostitution, as I said. But again, she has no rights to anything. And because women have no rights, they're just under a goat, as I've explained before. So this is where we're heading now. And anybody who speaks the truth about anything, if the UN, EU or our governments don't like it, the PESCO army will be sent into any of these countries or to your home to say, oh, did you mention the hijab in a negative way? Did you mention the UN in a negative way? Did you mention migration of the UN in a negative way? These are actually all criminalized now, people. So to have your own brain in your head, to have your own thoughts, and anyway express them, if it's not on the way that they feel it should be expressed, then you are criminalized, and you will lose your job, your home, and everything for just a brain, for having thoughts, unless it's the propaganda thoughts. Now, you can put up a woman in a hijab and say how beautiful it is, fantastic. It's, look at these horrible sluts and dreadful going around in t-shirts or bikinis, sinful, disgraceful, disgusting. You can say all that, and that's okay. But if you say anything like the other way around, or even slightly the other way around, you will be banned and criminalized. And that is the reality. There is no free speech. There's no even free thoughts. Thank you for listening on The Bon Ree Show on ITV.ie and Irish News Radio. And we'll be having our Gruesome Tuesday tomorrow. So talk to you tomorrow. What a horrible wet day. Thank you for listening again on The Bon Ree Show.
You are listening to Irish News Radio and irishnews.net. Email news@irishnews.net.